and welcome to Paper Pilgrims, a new literary podcast. Travel with us through time as we explore books from around the world. I'm Sneha Nagesh.
And I'm Alex Breeden.
And this particular episode, we are already on part 3, the last segment of the Temple of the Golden Pavilion episodes. Hooray! So far, we've discussed how the narrator, Mizoguchi, who we all know is going to end up burning this temple, but so far, it's all been about how he gets to that stage. And finally, in this segment, we can promise our listeners that you'll be able to see him do the act. So rejoice.
Yes, get some satisfaction. Oh, well, before we start this episode, did you know that David Bowie is a big Mishima Yukio fan? Apparently he was also a painter. I'm not a huge David Bowie fan, so I don't really know that much about him, but apparently he was a painter and he painted these portraits of Mishima, and one of them, I think it was over his bed. We'll actually have a link in the show notes if you want to take a look. But yeah, interesting. And yeah, David Bowie, I mean, he was connected in a number of ways to Japanese culture. He was also in a movie called Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which is set in World War II.
With Sakamoto Ruichi, who is a great Japanese composer. And if you haven't heard his music, we recommend it highly. But yeah, you're right. I think Bowie also used some of Mishima's books in his lyrics. And his fandom of Mishima sort of goes from art down to music. I don't know if they were actually interacting with each other, if they had any contact.
Apparently, David Bowie just happened to be in Tokyo when Mishima committed suicide. So there's that.
Oh, that's a shame. They might have made an interesting
couple. Yeah, I think that's called shipping. Now someone can go make an anime about that.
It's very cool. I don't know. Would you have a portrait of Mishima in your room? He was very good looking.
I wouldn't, because I have no interest in Mishima. But I would hang a picture of Tolstoy in my room. If it was a good painting, I would paint it myself and hang it in my room.
Well, now that we know that about Alex, we can go back to talking about the book. So in this scene here, Kashiwagi and Mizoguchi are discussing beauty, as they often do, because they often talk about very complex subjects without really making any small talk as a normal friend would. So what's happened is Kashiwagi and Mizoguchi's relationship progresses. They become closer and more intimate. And then Kashiwagi gifts him a flute. And then they sort of meet because Mizoguchi wants to repay Kashiwagi for the gift. So he steals some flowers because this is sort of Mizoguchi is starting to act more and more like a criminal. He finds joy in committing all these little crimes. And then they have this conversation. So let's listen to a reading where Kashiwagi and Mizoguchi are discussing beauty.
Beauty is like a decayed tooth. It rubs against one's tongue. It hangs there, hurting one, insisting on its own existence. Finally, it gets so that one cannot stand the pain, and one goes to the dentist to have the tooth extracted. Then as one looks at the small, dirty, brown, blood-stained tooth lying in one's hand, one's thoughts are likely to be as follows. Is this it? Is this all it was?
So that was our reader, Bowu, talking about beauty and how it's like a cavity or a rotten tooth.
Yeah, and this is a really good metaphor, I think. I mean, it's just a very succinct metaphor, and it really conveys the sort of that traditional religious view of beauty, where it's just beauty is something that's aggravating and distracting you from living a pure life, I guess.
Actually, I think reading this book, because, I mean, the premise is that this crazy person, Mizoguchi, who in real life, by the way, also I don't know if he was actually called Mizoguchi the criminal, but he also ended up burning the temple. The premise is that he gets obsessed with this beautiful thing, but then he wants to destroy it. And that, as I was reading it, it reminded me of the film Fight Club, where, in one of the scenes, the main characters, they're fighting and then they end up beating each other up. He says something like, I just wanted to destroy something beautiful. It's like a recurring, as I was reading this book, it reminded me of that scene very distinctly, because I feel like I've seen that the feeling of wanting to destroy something really good is a recurring theme in so many films and books.
That's true. Now that you say that, there's also that Andy Warhol quote that's something like, every day you should destroy something beautiful or something like that.
Right, because maybe when you destroy something beautiful, you can get to the essence of it, or
It's also just like suffocating in a way sometimes if you have too much like luxurious things around you, which I think is sort of what Mishima's getting at in a way. You know, if you have all that stuff around you, it's sort of suffocating, and you're living for your things, or you know, you're living for something outside of yourself rather than for yourself.
like falling in love for the first time when it consumes you completely and you can't do anything else, and it's so painful and so obsessive, and you kind of want it to end but you don't want it to end, but then you can only be liberated when it finally ends in a way. But anyway, so
I think this is actually in one of the movies that we're going to talk about later as well. I think it's quoted in Mishima Life in 4 Chapters. So Mizoguchi and Kashiwagi are talking, and they're having this discussion. Kashiwagi offers his own interpretation of Nansen kills a kitten, the Zen riddle, and Mizoguchi compares the kitten to this tooth, right?
so because in this koan, in the Zen koan, we talked about in the previous episodes, but just to summarize what happens, there's a kitten comes into the monastery, and then it's very cute, but it's also distracting, so
the two sides of the temple are arguing about it,
and then it transpires that they end up killing this kitten, and so the father ends up killing the kitten, and we're trying to understand why he behaves in that way, why they had to kill that kitten, and why the other side or the spectators don't say anything in response,
and why the other monk who comes back later, Joshu, walks out with a dirty sandal on his head, which is just incomprehensible on the face of it. So killing the kitten is like extracting the tooth, which makes the father in the koan, he's the one killing the kitten, and he's extracting the tooth, and thereby destroying beauty and creating a peaceful situation, a higher, more refined situation.
It's basically getting rid of distractions so you can focus on what's important.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Which is, and that's what meditation is about, and that's what in Zen you have Zazen, which is even more strict form of meditation. Essentially, you're trying to destroy what's distracting, and that's why it's a recurring theme in so many cultural forms.
Later, Kashiwagi's Ikebana teacher comes over, and it's the woman from earlier, with the breast milk woman.
Kashiwagi's Ikebana teacher rocks up. Mizoguchi doesn't know this, but it's a woman he recognizes from Nanzenji, where he saw this woman give her breast milk to a man. So it's a very, very strange encounter. And Kashiwagi, I guess, doesn't know about this as well. And the woman doesn't know anything about it, obviously, until now. So in the beginning, they just have some conversations, but then things happen, and then Kashiwagi ends up slapping the woman because she destroys the Ikebana arrangement that he's painstakingly made.
Yeah, and he's just doing his Kashiwagi thing of like abusing anything that he deems beautiful and making himself superior to it.
So she runs out. Kashiwagi actually tells Mizoguchi to run after her, as though he knew that Mizoguchi was obsessed with this woman and he should provide some opportunity for Mizoguchi to interact with this obsession. So now such an opportunity presents itself, and then they end up talking for a long time, and then Mizoguchi reveals that he saw her give her breast milk to another man in Nanzenji temple. And what does she do, Alex, at this point?
I believe she pulls out her breast. Because to her, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Well, because in her mind, Mizoguchi is now reminding her of her dead fiance, I guess. So, I mean, there's some sentimental thing going on there that is sort of understandable. And then Mizoguchi sees the Golden Pavilion and is made impotent again by the Golden Pavilion.
This happens a few times in the book, where the Golden Temple appears and Mizoguchi is unable to take action because of the appearance of the temple, which is also one of the main reasons why he wants to destroy it so badly.
Right, but at the same time, it's this weird thing where the Golden Pavilion is also purifying and saving him from being sucked into sensuality, the way that the father at the Golden Pavilion is being destroyed by sensuality.
Our father Dosen, yeah, right, who often, even though he's the head priest at the temple, he's often hanging out with geisha and, indulging in all sorts of...
He's a chubby pink beancake.
He's a chubby beancake. That's how he's described in the book. And he loves having sex with lots of different people. Mizoguchi is constantly fighting between really, really loving this temple and really, really wanting to be free of.
Yeah, and I think this all goes back to that Nietzschean philosophy stuff I was talking about in the first episode. You have to destroy these old values which are causing you pain in order to get to some sort of new, better value.
Which is also what Mishima was thinking about that a lot. Also after the war, when Japan lost its values, and he was finding ways to create new values for himself as well. He had his own style of doing that.
So after this, Mizoguchi's standing at the temple deteriorates, things go bad with Father Dosen, and he decides to run away.
And he runs away to the north of Kyoto, which is, so if you think about the geography of Kyoto, most people actually, when they think of Kyoto, they think of Kyoto City, which is the big city, in Kyoto Prefecture, which is a wider area. Kyoto City is sort of towards the south. It's landlocked, so there's no seaside here. But if you go towards the north of Kyoto Prefecture, which is the wider area, then you come to the Sea of Japan, the area where Mizoguchi runs away to.
So did you go to the Sea of Japan? You were just on holiday, right?
I went to Amano Hashidate, which is a small town along the Sea of Japan. It's one of 3 best views in Japan. It is a very beautiful view. Although the place where visitors go, it's sort of like a bay area, and you just see this really beautiful view. But to me, it kind of felt touristy and plain. Even though it's so beautiful, it sort of didn't inspire any big feelings.
Which ironically is kind of like what Mizoguchi feels like, because when he gets to the sea after taking this train trip, the first thing he sees is Maizuru Bay, but it's an enclosed bay, so it's like an artificial bay, and you have all these Americans swarming it, so he's like not really into that. So that's sort of a similar situation.
It's a pretty thing, it looks good in the sunset, and it inspires a different kind of feeling. But if you're really looking to be wildly inspired and you really want to see the sea, then you have to see an open sea area. Mizoguchi sort of goes past the Maizuru Bay, and then he arrives at, I think he goes to Yura Beach.
But on the way there, he passes the residence of Sanshou Dayu, who is this famous character in Japanese literature, as well as there's a really famous movie about Sanshou Dayu by Mizoguchi Kenji, who is one of the great golden period directors for Japanese cinema. I would definitely recommend that movie. It's a great movie. But I don't think it really has anything to do with what's happening here. It just seems like a random sidebar.
It's not like Bowie just slotting in Mishima's things and his lyrics. Maybe that's what Mishima was doing for Sanshou Dayu. Mizoguchi arrives at the real Sea of Japan. So Mizoguchi is at the Sea of Japan, and finally he feels truly inspired.
I mean, everyone has these sorts of moments, right? When you're like in nature.
Well, especially the sea. I mean, as we were discussing before, especially a wild sea. And with the Sea of Japan, land masses are kind of far away. So you feel like you're really free in a way. And I think that's what Mizoguchi feels here. Because so far he's been in the sort of oppressive atmosphere at Temple of the Golden Pavilion.
Yeah, I mean, he understands that the Sea of Japan is really what he should be aiming for. The Sea of Japan is the antonym sort of the Golden Pavilion, and that it embodies all of these values that Mishima thinks are valuable, and that he as an individual should aspire to.
As a reader, you know from the beginning that the temple is going to be set fire to, but at this point, finally, it gets a bit more concrete, and you're getting close to that scene.
It's like watching all those historical movies about World War II, where Hitler dies in the end. But the argument he's making here is that he's got to burn the Golden Pavilion because, like a nicely mown lawn on a spring day, it's that softness that makes you cruel. Which, I mean, do you buy that as an argument? It just seems like, if you think about it, it's really just a ridiculous argument.
When you're trying to create something, or when you're trying to take actions that are outside of your comfort zone, you do need energy and inspiration from something that's much bigger than yourself. And the moment you go into a life, if you're actually very comfortable, if you're in a lifestyle where you're not challenged, and you're just really satisfied with all these luxuries, then you can't take action. I mean, that's so yeah, I sort of buy it in that way.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, looking at it from the lens of Mishima, he's saying that having this Spartan nature is what makes you a good person, essentially, and that it's softness that makes you cruel. But like 10 years earlier, it was the Japanese military who was instigating a world war in Asia and killing millions of Chinese people. So in that respect, it's hard for me to buy it.
I mean, Mishima was inspired by that. Killing people, I don't know if he was inspired by that, but I think of having, maybe maybe he was aspiring for using that Spartan lifestyle to go towards another set of values that he just hadn't realized what they were yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what Mishima's ideal society is, but clearly he was very militaristic and very nationalistic, and to me it just doesn't, that seems like that usually ends up in extreme cruelty, so I don't really buy Mishima's argument here.
When this book was being written, a lot of what Mizoguchi is feeling is what Mishima was probably experiencing and feeling at the time.
Anyways, so he decides to burn down this temple, and then we have to wait another 70 pages.
I think this part of the book does lack a bit of tension.
Yeah, it really slows down for me right around here. I mean, the whole book is really repetitive, but this is just like... I mean, Mishima was really tight on structuring his novels, and he would outline his novels beforehand in detail, but I feel like he's not maybe as concerned... Well, clearly, he actually wrote popular, like quote-unquote popular fiction as well. That was just for, popular consumption, that maybe the masses would read and that would sell more and that he could support himself with. So, I mean, clearly he knows how to write a popular novel. I guess he just doesn't care here, and he's more interested in dealing with philosophical stuff that he wants to... So Mizoguchi goes to the brothel. He sleeps with the woman for the first time, and he's not made impotent by the Golden Pavilion. So clearly he's had some, this revelation at the beach has really changed him in the head.
Just go to the Sea of Japan if you're having infertility issues. There are a lot of shrines there, which are to improve fertility, yeah.
Speaking of fertility shrines and the ocean, have you seen The Lighthouse? It's a great movie. A horror movie. It's set out on this island with a lighthouse, obviously, and there's two lighthouse keepers. One is William Dafoe, and the other is Robert Pattinson, and they're sort of having this weird power play relationship with all these like sexual things going on at the same time, and there's the ocean is there, so it's kind of similar. Getting back to the brothel, so Mizoguchi has his first time with a prostitute. He's not impotent, and then we have this one quote where he says, "Then I was overcome by the feeling that everything had left me in the lurch, yet it was not sufficient to make me weep." I feel like this shows up in a lot of classical literature, or just, it probably happens to a lot of people in general, where like the first time you have sex, it's confusing, a lot of different emotions going on. But this in particular reminded me of Tolstoy, who also went to the brothel and slept with a prostitute for his first time, and then he cried and was like horribly scarred by the whole affair. And then later Mizoguchi brings, or is this the same visit? I don't remember. Yeah. So Mizoguchi also brings the prostitute a copy of Beccaria's Crime and Punishment, which is that's the original tract about... So it's a treatise on basically reforming laws about crime and punishment from Italy. And that's what I believe Dostoevsky's novel, his title of his novel is based off. Again, we're reminded of Raskolnikov, right? Where he's committing this crime that he thinks is going to... all these
male criminals always find comfort in going to a woman and talking about other things apart from the crime. They feel less guilty for it, maybe.
Someone can write a thesis on all of these things, all these recurrent crime and punishment incidents.
Mizoguchi then starts preparing to burn Kinkakuji.
He also buys a couple things, because he thinks he's going to commit suicide, and he buys Calmatin and a knife. And the translation actually says arsenic, but it's not arsenic, it's Calmatin, which, if you remember, is how the narrator in No Longer Human tries to kill himself. Apparently Calmatin was a popular thing to use for suicide in Japan in the middle of the 20th century. I think it's translated as arsenic because, it's basically the same thing, right? In the West, I guess arsenic would be a popular way to kill yourself. I mean, definitely murder. It was a common murder.
So anyway, you have finally Mizoguchi comes to the Golden Pavilion, and this could be a really dramatic scene, sort of like the scene in Tarkovsky's film Sacrifice, in which the character burns his house. It's a very famous scene. I think they had to redo that scene as well, which is interesting. Anyway, so you'd expect that Mizoguchi finally burning this temple that he's been thinking about for so long would be really dramatic, but I don't know about you, I kind of felt it was sort of a bit anticlimactic. It could be like it wasn't so much about the fire, which is what I wanted to hear more about, and it was more about Mizoguchi feeling all wild and sort of what he describes when he goes to the Sea of Japan. I thought those sentiments would be coming through here. But instead, it was more about the architectural details of King Kakuji.
Which is not exactly what you want to be reading at the climax.
I don't think whoever, Mizoguchi, that criminal who actually burned, the monk who burned it 50 years ago, I don't think he was thinking about, oh, look, now the Senmon is going up into flames, and now it's the...
I think Mishima overdoes it a little bit on the philosophical and architectural details.
So this part, I think, could have been a bit more stronger. But anyway, he sets fire to it, and finally it burns down, and he wants to kill himself. However...
For a brief moment, he wants to kill himself, but he tries to go up to the top level, but the door is locked, so he can't get in. And then he realizes he's been rejected again by the temple for the last time, runs away, runs up the mountain, and...
He doesn't feel any huge emotion after this big deed. He kind of feels relaxed, and he's just having a smoke.
Right. Well, I think he feels relieved, and he feels relieved, and he feels like going back again to the whole nihilism thing and destroying stuff and creating new things. At this point, he feels relaxed because he's like a new person, right? He's destroyed the old thing. He's taken out that tooth that was aggravating him, and now he's a new person, and he can do these. He can be who he wants to be.
I'm happy for Mizoguchi.
And a loss for Japan.
Now the temple's rebuilt, and
we got a novel out of it.
And it makes it, I mean, we talked about the temple before, and how it's a little bit gaudy. But then when you visit it with this episode in mind, you see it in a different way, naturally.
That's true. Literary tourism. Right.
So this book inspired quite a few other people. I don't know if this book inspired Mishima Life in 4 chapters, but Mishima Life in 4 chapters, more about Mishima Yukio. It's really good.
Yeah, I agree.
It's actually, it takes a bunch of Mishima's books, and then it overlays that along with his real life. They had trouble making this film because Mishima's wife and his family wasn't very open to...
Oh, they probably didn't like the depiction of him as a gay man, I would assume.
Yeah, I think it had some trouble at film festivals because it was, the Mishima's widow sort of was against it. The movie itself, it's, it has music by Philip Glass, and as you'd imagine, because I expected it to have music by Philip Glass.
It does make sense. Somehow, when you watch the movie, it makes perfect sense.
The actors are really good, and they Ken Ogata. Yeah, you understand a bit more about how Mishima created these works, and
I think the imagery is also really, really good, really beautiful, really well done. Like the image of the Golden Pavilion as this sort of glimmering golden thing that's and it like swings open, and you have all these sort of stylized colors around it. It's really nice.
I felt like I was at the theater and not so much watching a film. Very dramatic. Highly recommended. Right, and then you watched another film.
Yeah, I watched Conflagration by Ichikawa Kon. And Ichikawa is one of the great Japanese film directors of the Golden Age, just like Mizoguchi Kenji, who I mentioned before. And this one is much closer. I mean, this one is exclusively about King Kakuji, Temple of the Golden Pavilion. But of course, it's it's a novel made into a movie, so it's trimmed down, and it's also I feel like he changed the title for a reason because it's sort of different. The emphases are different from the novel, and it's more just like a normal. Mizoguchi's thinking is more normal and relatable. It's just he sees the Golden Pavilion as a beautiful thing being defiled by the people around him, that's sort of easier and more conventional as a plotline, I think. And it's also missing. Surprisingly, it's missing some of the scenes that you would kind of expect. Like, there's no breast milk scene, which I feel like would be very eye-catching in a movie. I was disappointed. I admit I was disappointed. But also, like, that scene, maybe it just wasn't feasible. I don't know. But the scene with the prostitute as well, that's changed. There's no stomping on the prostitute's stomach. So, definitely some major changes, and thematically especially, it's really different.
All right, so that was the end of this episode and our Temple of the Golden Pavilion series. We hope you enjoyed listening to it. In the next episode, we continue our discussion about post-war Japan books. So in the next episode, we're going to be talking about a very interesting writer, Kenzaburo Oe, and the book we'll be discussing is his first book, which was written when he was 23, and that's Nip the Buds, Shoot the Kids. So watch the space for that. And in the meantime, the references from this episode about the Temple of the Golden Pavilion will be up on our SNS and on our platform. So please check that out. Thank you so much for listening and see you soon again.